This past weekend, I held my Christmas in July event with a good friend of mine, Lynn Anderson. And so after that event, I was just super excited to continue creating some Christmas cards. Hi, it's Lynn Dunn from Stamptastic Designs. Thanks so much for joining me today. In this episode of Stamptastic TV, I have 4 ways that you can use layering dies in your card making. Now, the cards in this video feature a new product bundle called Peace and Joy, and some fun new layering dies. For a complete list of supplies and all of the step-by-step instructions for creating these cards, feel free to download the printable tutorial. You can find the link in the description below this video. Okay, so let me show you how these dies work. So we're going to create this very first card, and it actually showcases the 3 different layers that you can create with the layering die set here. Okay, so there's 3 different dies that we're going to use. So the first one cuts out this very thin word. So we're just going to use the bright word as an example. So that's this die. And then the second die cuts out just a slightly larger word, kind of like a bubble shape here, so that you can easily layer these 2 together. So that's the second one. And then the third die cuts out this larger shape. And so that allows you to create 3 different layers of words to use on your card. So it's pretty cool, and it's pretty simple to use. So let's talk about how to make this first card. So basically, you're just going to be randomly stamping different images from the set in the background until you achieve the desired look. Okay, now that we've finished stamping, we can go ahead and put together our focal point, which is going to be our layered sentiment. So I'm going to layer these 3 pieces together, and then we're just going to add it to the front of the card. So I'm just switching out the background colors. Okay, so now we can go ahead and adhere these. Okay, so there's the first 2 layers, and then I'm just going to take this real thin layer, and actually what I'm going to do is sponge a little bit of glue on the back. So I've just sponged a little bit of glue on the back, and now we'll just adhere this right in the center of this white piece. And there's also just a very tiny dot for the eye. So we'll add that. Okay, so we'll give this just a little bit to dry. And let's go ahead and finish up our card here. So I'm basically using Mossy Meadow cardstock for the base of my card. And then this piece that I did my stamping on is just a 5 by 3 3/4 inch piece of white cardstock. So I just did my random stamping on that. And now I can adhere this sentiment directly down to the card. So this time I just added some dimensionals to the back, and I'm going to pop this up on the card. Okay, and then for the finishing touch, I'm just going to add a little sentiment that I stamped out here. We'll pop this up with a couple dimensionals. It just says Merry and Bright. And there you go. You have a very fun and beautiful Christmas card, and it was so simple to put this together. Okay, so the second way that you can use these layering dies is actually just to create a little window card. So in this particular case, I decided to do some stamping of these words instead of die cutting, but you can certainly do the die cutting of the words instead of the stamping of the words. But let me show you how to create this fun card. So basically, you're going to start out with a piece of white cardstock for the base of your card. And you're going to cut a 5.5 by 4 1/4 inch piece of pattern paper. So I'm using some fun new pattern paper from the holiday catalog. So before we glue this piece down to the front of our card, we're just going to line it up on the front. And then we're going to take our 2 largest die cuts, kind of the bubble die cuts that we used on that other card. And we're going to lay those on the front of the card and on our pattern paper. And then I'm going to run this through the embossing machine and cut this out to create the window. Okay, so now that I've cut these out, I can remove these pieces. And the reason I suggested that we cut this out and not adhere this piece down to the front, I mean, we could have, because the die cuts through both pieces at the same time, but the reason I didn't adhere it is because now I have some fun little pieces that I can use to create additional cards. So that's what I'm going to show you next. So we're going to save these pieces, and we're going to go ahead and adhere this one down to the card front. So I recommend using liquid glue just because it will give you a little bit of play when you go to adhere this to your card front. If you use other adhesive, you got to be pretty accurate with your placement. And by using the liquid glue, it gives you a little bit of an ability to scoot this around to where you need it. So you can see I'm just kind of scooting it to get it lined up correctly. Okay, so now we've created our little window. Now you could actually use some layering dies. You could actually use just this die, the small one, in here. You could layer the small one and the second one, the second largest one, right in here, and that would give you a really nice look too. But I want to show you how to actually stamp in this space because there is a stamp in here that coordinates with the die, and so I want to show you how easy it is to stamp in there. So I'm just inking my stamp up with some Mossy Meadow, and I'm just going to go directly in the center of this space. And you get a really nice image. Now I'm using a little darker ink than I did on the last one. For this one I'm using Mossy Meadow, for this one I used Old Olive. And now I'm going to just do the same thing with the Joy sentiment. So it gives just a really nice crisp look. And then when you open up the card, you have some sentiments already on the inside. So I'll show you how to decorate the inside in just a second. Okay, to finish off the front of the card, I'm going to add a little strip of designer paper down on the bottom. So this piece is just 1 by 4 1/4 inches. Now you might notice on the other one I have a little larger piece. That's because I put the Peace and Joy higher up on the card. This one I brought it down a little lower. So you might have to readjust your measurements for your card depending on where you put your die cuts on your paper. And then I'm just adding a little 1/2 inch strip of Mossy Meadow cardstock. So this is just 1/2 by 4 1/4 inches. And then to finish off the outside, I'm simply going to add some rhinestones. Okay, and then you just add a little sentiment here. So it says Peace and Joy. So I just cut this out of a scrap piece of white cardstock. And then on the inside, I actually mounted a 5 1/4 by 4 inch piece of red cardstock on the inside of the card, and then a 5 by 3 3/4 inch piece of white cardstock. So I did that actually before I stamped this on the front. But on this card, I decided just to do it directly on the inside of the card. I didn't add anything in particular. So you can do it either way. But I like the look of this one simply because we just added, you know, another little sentiment and then another little holly on the inside. So it's kind of a fun way to use the dies. Okay, the third way that you can use this die is just to use 2 different layers. So in this case, I'm using one of those leftover pieces from creating the previous card. So when we cut out that little window, this is what was left over of the pattern paper, so I'm using it to create this card. So let me show you how to make this one. So first we're going to create the focal point. So I'm just using a stitched circle and a scalloped red circle, and I'm just going to adhere those 2 together. Then I'm going to take the little designer series paper piece, and I'm just going to add a little small sentiment, the little Joy sentiment, right in the center there. So I'm going to add that with some liquid glue, and then we are ready to pop it up on our focal point. Okay, so we'll pop that up on here, and we can set this aside. And then the next thing, we need a 5 by 3 3/4 inch piece of white cardstock. And then we're going to add a little piece of designer paper towards the top here. So this piece is 1 1/4 by 3 3/4. Then we can go ahead and add our focal points. So I'm just popping it up with a couple dimensionals. And then on the bottom, I just did a little bit of paper tearing. So you just kind of grab your paper and just slowly tear along to get kind of that worn look. And then we're ready to adhere this to our card front. But before we do that, I'm going to add a little piece of pattern paper here down on the bottom. So I have cut a 2 by 3 3/4 inch piece of pattern paper. So I'm going to adhere that first, and then we'll adhere that other piece over the top. Now I just cut it at 2 inches just to give myself enough play. So by cutting it a little wider, it just makes sure that I have enough so that when I go to lay this on top, that I have enough pattern paper on the bottom. And now we will just embellish it with a little sentiment. And then for the finishing touch, we're again going to add a couple little red rhinestones just to accent the card. Okay, so now you have another fun way to use these layering dies. Okay, and the last card idea I have features the other leftover piece of designer paper, and then I just added another little bubble behind it, and of course added one of the layering sentiments on top of the designer series paper. So let me show you how to do this one. So I simply started with a piece of Mossy Meadow cardstock for the base of my card. And then I cut another 5 by 3 3/4 inch piece of white cardstock, although this time I added a little designer series paper on the bottom. So this is a 1 1/4 by 3 3/4 inch piece of designer paper. So I added this to the bottom, and then I added my embossing up on the top. So I just slid this into my embossing folder and left the designer series paper kind of hang out the bottom of my embossing folder. So that way it didn't emboss the designer paper, it just embossed the top of my cardstock. And then I again added a 1/2 inch piece of Mossy Meadow cardstock. So this is a 1/2 by 3 3/4 inches. So that just kind of covers up that seam between the embossing and the designer paper. And then I have this leftover designer paper piece that I added one of the smaller sentiments to it. And then I'm just going to kind of layer it so that this other piece, I cut out this other piece from a piece of Mossy Meadow cardstock, and I'm just going to kind of layer these together and then place them on the card. So I'm popping this piece up with a few dimensionals, and then I'm just going to add a little bit of liquid glue to the back of the darker green, and then we'll adhere this to our card front. And then of course I have another sentiment, so mine says peace on earth. And then for the finishing touch, we can again go ahead and add some of these rhinestones to our card front. So there's the 4th way that you can use these layering words to create some fun cards. Now there are lots and lots of other ways that you can use these. I'm just showing you 4 different ways today. So there you go. Now you have 4 different ways that you can use layering dies in your card making. And if you enjoyed this video, feel free to download the printable tutorial. You can find the link in the description below this video. Thanks so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know by liking it and sharing it with your friends. And leave me a comment below to let me know what you enjoyed most about the video and the cards shared here today. Have a fun and creative day, my friends. Take care.